Hello, AP Econ guys. Here in my revamped new floor classroom, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about current accounts. But to do that, I do have a guest speaker in for us today. So if you would just hold on a second while I go get the door. Okay. So my guest speaker's here, and so if you would just wait a second. It's Coach Walker, Mr. Walker's alter ego. I'm going to be teaching today. I'm sick of waiting for August. I'm ready to start football now. We've got a lot of learning to do, but we're not going to do it Coach Walker's way. Excuse me, we are going to do it Coach Walker's way. We're not going to do it Mr. Walker's way. I'm not so sure why the lower half of my body is invisible, but we'll adapt and adjust. Let's get to it. Start sharing my screen here with you guys. And we're going to talk about the economy, the macro economy. And to do that, we're going to introduce our unit on capital flows and foreign exchange. So, Kobe, get in your seat. If you keep walking around, I'm going to send you on laps around the field. And I'm going to sick Coach Foley on you and make you do dolphins nonstop. And if you don't know what they are, go ask Coach Foley. So balance of payments accounts. The fact of the matter is that you've got lots of Americans buying stuff, and they're buying stuff from our country. They could be buying footballs, for example, and not European footballs, American footballs, because we don't make European footballs. We're also buying things from them, and they better be making football equipment, because that's the only thing we would buy from them. Economists keep track of internal transactions using the balance of payments account. So this is just what we're going to use to keep focus and to give an idea what's going on. You need to know what the balance of payments accounts are, Kobe. Okay. So what we will do is we're going to use like an auto shop for an example, and then we'll expand it out. And we'll talk about lots of other facets of the economy, okay? But to keep it simple, right? We got to walk before we can run on this one. Let's say that a family runs an auto shop. And over the course of the year, they're earning something like $45,000 in sales. All right, so that $45,000, that's going to be their purchases. It's going to be the sale of their goods and services. And then they're taking in that money, but they're going to be doing things with it. So they're going to spend it on some other things. So for example, if it's a family running this auto shop, they're going to take around about $400,000 for living expenses, basically money to run the shop, to keep the shop running, as well as their own living expenses. So what are they netting? Pause the video and answer. You should know it's 50,000. If you couldn't figure out 50,000, we got bigger problems. So they're netting about 50,000. And so what might they do with that? Well, let's also say, I mean, this isn't going to be their only source of income, this family running the auto shop, they're earning about 5,000, give or take, in interest and savings and other investments. And then that the family is going to pay $25,000 because we haven't included the mortgage on the building for the auto shop. That would be a part of their uses of the cash. So between 25,000, they're netting about negative 20,000. So they got about, they earn 5,000 there in certain terms of their sources for the cash, but then they've got to spend 25. So they're down now negative 20. In terms of loans and deposits, let's say that they're taking the remaining cash and they're depositing in the bank. Well, what's the remaining cash going to be? In terms of they're not getting the cash from anywhere else. In other words, they're not giving other people loans, but they are taking the remaining cash and they're just depositing. They're depositing in the bank. So what you should see is they're taking, they have $50,000 from running the shop. They're losing about 20 in terms of interest income and payments. So any sorts of interest-bearing sorts of assets and liabilities added together, that's about minus 20. So that's going to be a liability for them. And so from A and B, we add those together, we get 30,000. And so essentially, if they're putting all of this in the bank, we've got to say that they found another use for that cash, and they found a use for all the cash that they're getting, so they're just putting it away. And so the total that we should always come up with when we're figuring these types of things is always zero. If it's anything other than zero, it's considered to be an error, because there's only two things we can do with cash that we have on hand. What are those two things, Kobe? Yeah, save it. We can save it or we can use it. And so they had 30,000 left over. They saved it. So we're left with nothing after that. Self-explanatory. All right. So moving on. This is copied straight from your textbook. So this should be, you have access to this information, but if we're to apply this to the entire United States, this is what we should see. All right. So we have sales and purchases of goods and services, and there's going to be payments from foreigners and to foreigners in this case. And I'll give you examples of each one, so don't flip out, Kobe. Anyway, so these are as simple as imports and exports. So payments from foreigners, obviously they're paying for goods and services from us. By definition, those are exported goods. Payments from foreigners, these are payments coming to us as Americans. So payments to foreigners, what would those be then? Imports. Goodness, yes, you're correct, imports. So for example, oil from Venezuela or oil from Saudi Arabia, those would be payments to foreigners. We're paying for those goods and services. And so what you should see is that we're actually losing money in this exchange. And historically, this is always the case. We're always operating in a trade deficit. It's not an indication that the economy is not in good shape. It's just an indication that Americans have money to spend, and they're spending at other places more so than foreigners are buying stuff from us. And so usually the United States operates in a negative figure. Okay, kind of like Kobe's rushing yards, negative figure. Okay, anyway, that was a pretty good burn, and that was completely on the fly. Factor income. Walmart, an American company, earns profit from stores in Europe. This is income payment from foreigners two people in the United States. So to Walmart in this case. Walmart has stores other places. McDonald's has stores other places. They're paying us. Ford has stores other places in other countries, and people are buying from those companies. On the other hand, we're also doing the same thing. So if I get my car at Honda, okay, it might count towards our GDP, right? But it's not. That is money that is outflowing towards the owners of Honda, which is a Japanese company. Funds sent by residents to residents of one country to residents of another. This is estimated. So usually this would be an outflow situation as well. It's it's not as often that people living in other countries are sending people less well off in the United States. It's more common for people in the United States. So for example, let's say, Stas has a grandmother in Germany, right? It would be a better example for people to go, for Stas, if he's making money in the United States, to send money to his grandmother in Germany, who might need the money, okay? Or just an individual, let's say, like, if somebody has family in Guatemala, that they might send money that they make here back to their family in Guatemala. So for the United States, it's going to be a negative number, but it's hard to figure out exactly what this number is just because this happens all the time. And so you have to kind of guesstimate on it. So you add up all those three and just kind of table that for the time being. Let's talk about the other one, which is financial account. Another word for this is capital account. This is when the Central Bank of China purchases a U.S. Treasury. Cash flows from China to the United States. So the Chinese Federal Reserve, right, central bank, buying stuff from a U.S. Treasury, buying bonds because the U.S. dollar is reliable and U.S. bonds are reliable. And so they're buying those, and hopefully they will make profit on that one day. When the Fed purchases securities from the Chinese bank, so in this case, our Fed is buying bonds from another place. Could be China, could be some other place, and then the addition of those funds is calculated in your net number here. So again, what do we figure from this? Who's doing more of the buying, the Fed or the Chinese, or internationally, I guess? So, and yet you're right. In this case, it would be international. And then the private purchases or the private sales of purchased assets. So, for example, these are investment type situations. Let's say that a Brazilian company buys an apartment building in Boston, attempting to make profit off of that. Or Coca-Cola, for example, buys a factory in Mexico. If Coca-Cola does that, that's a U.S. company. We could have a negative number here because private citizens could do that as well. In the end, what we see is the United States is doing more of this. In this case, we've got a positive number. So between these two numbers here, these are the ones you're adding up together, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. And you should be coming up with two separate numbers. You add up those together, and if you don't come up with 0, we refer to that as a statistical error, as we said before. This is the most important thing to know about this. If you're confused about distinguishing between current account and financial account, know this, Kobe. All you got to know is that current account, they do not create liabilities. They do not create liabilities. It is an upfront purchase. You're selling for exchange for a good or a service, whether you're a foreigner or from the United States, and no liability is created. It's simply a transaction. Balance of payments on goods and services. plus factor income and net transfer payments. Is as simple as that. Transfer payments, we did talk about that. Anyway, difference between a country's merchandise trade. We don't so much worry about that bottom part. We don't need to know about that. The other part is the financial account. Financial account, if those don't create liabilities, you can assume that these will create liabilities. Transactions that involve sale of assets and therefore do create liabilities, like the purchasing of an apartment building. And again, the other word of it, the other way to refer to it is capital, is a capital account. If the Chinese central bank is buying treasuries or securities from the United States, then the United States is going to owe them in the long run, owe them interest on that purchase, because they're essentially buying into United States debt. So what you should have gathered from this, given if you're adding those two together, and remember back when we were discussing we were discussing inflows and outflows in the circular flow diagram, things coming in and out of the economy, whether internationally or domestically. We determined that what goes in must come out. The same thing applies here. Current account plus financial account should equal zero. Those two numbers together should be equaling zero. So, for example, if the United States is lacking on the current account side of things, then they should be in a surplus on the financial account side of things. It should be doing more of the investing type thing, because that you can't have any money left over, as we discussed in the personal example with the auto shop. So another way to say this is current account equals negative financial account. So those should be the same numbers, just inverted. Sources of cash must equal usage. We talked about that. Financial account is a measure of capital inflows, money coming into. So other people, other countries, other businesses are saving money, and they're investing in other places in their country, within their country, but also on the outside of their country, in other places. What does this should remind you of something? Loanable funds market. Why should this remind you of the loanable funds market? Because any money that they're taking, any money that they are using or that they have on hand is going to be invested. And so which side of the loanable funds are we talking about here? Kobe. Right, the supply side of loanable funds. So they're supplying funds to be loaned out. Assume all flows are in the form of loans. Ignore effects of exchange rates for now. So we will talk about the exchange rate, but that's coming more module 42 and 43. All right. One other thing that's important to talk about. So at this point, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to sit down and draw the loanable funds market with a real equilibrium rate of 3%. Next to it, draw a loanable funds market where the real equilibrium interest rate is 7%. Pause the video and do it. Okay. Hopefully you've done it, Kobe. I could see you just sitting through this and waiting for me. You know what, Kobe, drop down and give me 25. 25 push-ups right now. Pause the video, 25. Unpause. Thank you. Okay, so this is what we should, if we're doing two markets back to back, you'll see that we have the United States over here. We've got a market for Japan over here. So two separate markets for loanable funds. One has an interest rate of 7%, one has an interest rate of 3%. If you have money on hand that you're looking to make interest off of, which market are you more likely to put money into? Yeah, the one with the higher interest percent, or the one with the higher interest rate, 7%. It's better to get one if you're investing $100 at at 7% interest. You're going to get 107. That's much better than the 103 you would get over here. So, seeing the interest rate disparity, what would U.S. savers do? They're going to invest their money for the 7%. Uh, where they can receive the higher return? U.S. savers send dollars to Japan. These dollars are capital inflow for Japan. So money coming from the United States to Japan because they want to get the higher interest rate. Capital outflow is equivalent to that. So the difference between these two. And then you're going to have capital inflow in Japan represented by this triangle over here. Does that make sense? Okay. Underlying determinants of capital inflows. Differences in economic growth. A rapidly expanding country will have more demand. So if there's more room for growth, if there's more room for a company to expand and all that, they will have more demand and offer higher returns. Supply of funds reflects differences in savings across countries. Some countries save more than others, and then savings by governments. Budget deficit can lead to increased capital inflows in this case. The point is that it's really a two-way street. Financial investors in the United States send money to Japan because interest rates are higher there. And Japanese investors send money to the United States stock market because they believe the U.S. economy has a bright future. So we've got those two separate things at work here between current account and financial account. Hopefully we can determine the difference. Okay. Trying to get it back to my screen. Not having an easy time. Okay. So that's all I've got to say about this. I might be back just to make sure you guys aren't slacking off at home. Get off the couch, Windsor Antall, and get to work. Get back playing football, why don't you? Next year. All right. Peace out. Okay. Well, I'm back. Sorry, when I get into coach mode, I get a little crazy sometimes and a little mean. Kobe, if I said anything mean, just know that I was all hyped up on excessive amounts of testosterone, and I apologize for that. Anyway, hopefully I won't have to have him have to unleash Coach Walker again. Hopefully you guys will stay on it. Remember, take reading notes and drop them in the Dropbox. Have a good day, guys.